For this project, I'm going to be working on Yupo paper. This is the 140 pound, I believe. They also have the 300 pound or something or close to that, which is a heavier weight. Honestly, the heavier weight, I don't think you really, it's a lot more expensive. I think if you're going to use this, the lighter weight is fine because it's still very, very thick. Now, this portion is on the live stream, so you can watch this in real time over there. We're just going to rush through this so that we can get on to the rest of this tutorial, much of which is going to be live as well. Did I just call it tutorial? Tutorial. I can't talk. You guys know that. To draw this out, I used a regular graphite pencil. I want to say it was about a 2H, right around there. I did let it be a little bit darker so that it would show through these lines so I wouldn't lose them as I was working. Okay, so moving on here. I'm using the small end of these markers and I'm moving them in the direction that I would want the feathers to go. I can blend this out or I can leave it streaky. A lot of what I'm doing here is very sketchy. I'm not trying to make a perfectly smooth blended look. Now the smooth side that you're seeing on the right side of the finished drawing, I didn't originally plan that out. I was going to put detail everywhere and I ended up with something that was, the head didn't stand out enough. I needed to soften that background out so that you could see the head. I mean, everything was just my values were too similar all the way through. I didn't have any real contrast with my lights and my darks, not enough to make the head stand out. And the head obviously should be the focus there. So I did end up blending that, but I didn't plan on doing that to start with. So I'm just fading a few colors, layering this in there. And my colors aren't necessarily exact to what my reference photo was. They don't need to be. I'm just going for close. And working off camera because that's what I do. Now, if you're trying to blend these, ideally, usually I'll try to work on one small area where it will stay wet. These do reactivate when you put another color on top of them or another marker or even the same marker, same color. They will reactivate, so you can always lift something off. You can always go back and blend if you add a little bit of water on a Q-tip, which you'll see me do later. These are really fun to play with, and I think for me with this medium, this is something that I am still largely playing with. I don't feel like I've even come close to mastering this. I've only done a handful of projects with these markers. So everything at this stage for me is very much experimental. And I think that that's important when you're learning to work with a new medium. Don't be super critical of yourself and expect everything to be completely perfect right from the beginning. You're just going to be discouraged. Yeah, I've done peacocks that were super realistic in acrylics. So it would be easy for me to go, oh no, I don't like this because I can't make it look as good as I do with acrylics. Well, I'm never going to get there if I don't keep experimenting and playing with them. And it's going to be a different look. I'm fine with that. But I've seen that a lot where someone will try a new medium and they're not as good with it the first time out and they get frustrated. Don't do that. Don't expect so much from yourself to start with. Let yourself play. Let yourself make a mess. Like in this case, if I wasn't willing to make a mess or even make it look worse than what it already looked like, I wouldn't have tried blending out that background. I'm glad I did it. It definitely improved on this. But just don't go into something new like this being super critical of yourself, being too worried about making everything perfect. Now the colors I didn't have all of the exact and I have a lot of colors of these. I've probably got 75 to 100 colors. I still didn't have some of the colors I wanted. You can mix them, but when I work with stuff like this, I'm just not that picky that everything be exact. Like always, I'm more worried about my values. Get your lights light enough, your darks dark enough. Much more so than making sure I have the perfect, right, exact color. And as I do this, as I'm being very sketchy, look how I'm making sure that the direction of those sketchy lines is going in the right direction. Now here, it's probably a bit of a waste because, well, not a total waste. I just didn't know I was going to blend this out, so there was really no reason to put too much detail in any of this. Good practice. We'll go with that as being a good reason. If you are new to these markers, Winsor & Newton does make their pigment marker paper. I recommend picking up a small pad of it just so you can test things out, because I don't want to test on the Yupo. The Yupo is much more expensive. The Yupo is a heavy weight. It's like cardstock almost. I mean, very thick, very nice paper. The Winsor & Newton pigment marker is 20 pounds, I believe. It's like working on tissue paper. I will never understand the thought process behind making a pigment marker or a light fast marker, because that's what these are. Like Copics are not light fast. These are light fast, which is a big deal. Making a light fast marker and then the paper you make to go with it is 20 pounds. Like, if it's light fast, the big selling point there is that you can sell it. You know, it's archival. I would like my paper not to rip when I sneeze. So, I mean, that paper is seriously thin. So you really do, I would recommend, while I do say get a pad of that, just use it for practicing on things. But if for your finished project, like that paper warps really bad, it tears easily, it's just not suitable for a finished project. I do not know what they were thinking with that, why they didn't make it a heavier weight. But the Yupo paper, actually Winsor & Newton themselves are the ones who recommended I try this instead, because that was my big complaint when I tested these the first time, is that paper is not suitable. I would never sell anything. Like, why are you making markers that are light fast so that I can sell it or sell the work, but your paper doesn't work with this? So these don't work real well. The blending techniques and what you'll see me do here, they don't really work well on regular marker paper. You want this type of slick surface, so either the Winsor & Newton pigment marker paper, which again, super thin, or the Yupo paper are the only two that I've used that I really liked. Winsor & Newton had also recommended a moleskin type. I tried to find I don't know what they were talking about. I've seen moleskin sketchbooks for the outside. I don't know. The paper itself, I've never found anything else. Whatever it was they were talking about, I couldn't find. Like, I searched their exact terms, never found it. So Yupo and then the Winsor & Newton pigment marker for practicing. Now, I've used colored pencil on top of some of this in other projects. I don't do it too often, and the only colored pencil I have tried that worked at all were the luminants. No other pencil, not even Prismacolor, definitely not Polychromos. They didn't really stick to this paper. This paper is super slick. There is no tooth to it. There's nothing for the pencil to grip to. The luminants did a decent job. I've not tried Procolor yet. I got Procolor after, I think, the last time I've used these. So I'll have to give those a test. But you can go over it for some things, but it's not super dark. It's not, I mostly used it to soften certain things out. It toned things down or softened the blending transition, but it wasn't, like, you couldn't take the white and have a really nice white highlight. I've actually yet to find a way that worked well with this. I've tried acrylics. I've tried the Russian pencil, their touch-up texture titanium white mixture. I've tried a few different things and I can't get definite white highlights. I need to try a gel pen, but it's because of the way that this reactivates and then on this paper, I've not found a good way to do that. So I definitely, my main thing is just to try to protect the white of the paper if I need it to be really light, like around the eyes on this guy. You can use water to lift it to an extent, but it isn't going to be perfectly white. And the main problem I had is when I tried to draw whiskers. I thought I could use a paintbrush with water and just lift off in areas. I didn't find a way to make that method work real well. I just kind of smudged it, but I wasn't getting definite lines. And as I sketched this in, this was all before I realized I was going to smudge all of this out. So I'm just kind of crisscrossing back and forth to give the look of those feathers. Now, the reference photo I'm using, which I'm pretty sure came from Pixabay, I'll find out and put a link in the description if that is where it came from. But I'm not copying it exactly. Every feather doesn't need to be in the exact right place. I'm using it just to get an idea of which direction these feathers go in, how they are put together, what colors, or a general idea of what colors go where. Just trying to find where some of my definite light and dark areas go and block those in. But don't just scribble in any direction. Well, I am scribbling, but it's controlled scribble. It's in the right, or more sketching really. But watch the direction that is going in. So let's speed this up a bit. I'm just repeating the same type. There's no like crazy marker stroke or anything that I'm doing here. I'm just working that marker in the direction that the feathers should go in. And I'm just building slowly too. I'm working around, but I'm not trying to finish one section at a time. I'm just lightly building and then build some more and then build some more. Now, I think that you can make something look super realistic with these, but for me, I've got other mediums that I think are better for that. So I kind of like that slightly more like an illustration or almost cartoony. It just has a more stylized feel to it. As I add the green, you can see where it will start to blend in a lot with the browns. It'll reactivate it. So I don't want to keep reworking the green over and over and over again, because the more I do that, the more it's going to reactivate the browns and the blacks and just blend together. So where I've added the green, or where I'm going back and forth with the different colors, I only want to make a couple of marker strokes there, or it will blend too much and I don't end up with definite green, definite brown areas. I end up with one muddy mess. Which is funny to say because I'm going to intentionally do that later, but it'll make sense why when you see what it looked like once the head was in. Just moving on, continuing to fill things in. You can see there where I'm layering this darker kind of brownish color on there. It's almost like a clay color, clay reddish brown. As I lay that onto the lighter tan color, if I do it quickly enough, it won't completely reactivate that area. But if I kept making brush strokes or marker strokes, I guess, over that, it will, and the two colors will just completely mix together. Now here I'm taking the clear. I'm trying to get those the portions of the feather that should be white, and that didn't work out too well. So I took a Q-tip with some water to wipe some of that off. You can see how it lifts that up. It's not completely white, but it is light enough. That for me is one of the things that makes me like this medium so much. I was never a huge fan of working with markers. I played around with Copics a little bit, not extensively, not enough to learn to use them well. So when I used these, or when I first started trying these, I didn't think that I would really like them, because I don't like that you can't really blend them well, or those sorts of things were my issue. I never learned to blend them well, I should say. They can be blended. But here, they blend so easily on this paper because of the way that they reactivate. It's so easy to fix mistakes too. That's the other thing that I really like. I always felt like when I worked with markers before, once I made a mark, that was it. These are really, because you can just wipe an area off. Just take a Q-tip with a bit of water, and I can wipe an area off that I screw up. Now, when I started in here, I thought I was going to leave or be very careful and work the marker in the direction with all of the feathers. And that is how I started. And then I quickly realized I'm wasting my time. This is ridiculous. And I ended up just filling the whole thing in solid with this base color. And you can still see the graphite lines through there just a bit. If I keep working the pencil over and over that area, the graphite will lift quite a bit more to where almost nothing is left. My marker strokes here don't really matter too much. I've got them going in the general direction that those feathers would be if they show it all, but honestly, I'm going to put so much on top of this, it didn't really matter. So if I needed to blend this out, I could have taken my finger and gone over all of this. I could have smudged it into this perfectly smooth, blended, almost like an oil painting look, or in this case, there was no reason to bother with that, so I just left it streaky. Now, if I leave it like that, obviously it's very flat. That is the right color. That's a great color for what I needed for this section. And this is where what people seem to or misunderstand when they're new to art is they think if they just find the right color, that's what's going to make something look right or look realistic or look good. I mean, not that this is super realistic, but look how flat it is. The right color doesn't do a whole lot for you if you don't work on your values. It's your values, how light your lights are, how dark your darks are. I'm sure you're sick of me here saying that, but it's pretty much the most important thing, that and having an accurate drawing if you're working in realism. Make sure to get that in there. Get those darks in there. Don't just, look, I got a good color and leave it flat. It's so funny because as I say that, I can think of so many of my older paintings that I used to think that's how it was, and that's how I left it, and I didn't understand why they didn't look realistic. They looked like cartoons because I didn't correct my values. Here I'm just taking I think this is the black marker, and going along the edges. Now, I didn't realize when I first did this that I was going to end up going back through and making these lines even more bold on some of this, because one of the things that I did to try to make the bird, the head stand out from the tail, is to go along the edge with a dark line. You can see that on the finished drawing on the right hand side of his neck and his head, and then along part of the feathers. At this point, I didn't know I was going to do that, so I am using the smaller side. A big tip I can give you for these markers, or really any markers, make sure the cap is on all the way, because if it hasn't snapped closed, it can cause the marker to dry out. We really don't want that. Now, these markers don't have any way to refill them, so once they're done, they are done. You'll just want to replace them at that point. They seem to last a really long time. I haven't had to replace any yet. I've completed, I want to say, about 5 pieces about this size, and I haven't run out of any color yet. So adding the brown on the reference photo, a lot of these feathers on the one side were a lot darker. So just, that's basically what I'm watching there. And then the direction that the little brush strokes or the streaks should be in. Like, I wouldn't want to go horizontal here. That wouldn't work. You can see this is, at this point, pretty much just sitting on top of the previous color because I'm not continuously reworking that marker on top of it. But if I kept doing brushstroke over brushstroke over brushstroke, it's going to reactivate that lime green color or yellow color, whatever color we want to call that. It's going to reactivate that and just blend together. And this green marker was really weak. Like, it was very translucent. The colors are pretty accurate on the marker, what color they're going to be. Some seem to be a little bit more pigmented, but for the most part, I would say that the colors on the marker are the ends of them are very accurate. But some colors, when you mix them in with another one, they're just kind of like, in this case, it's just a little bit weak. It's blending in a lot, like the yellow underneath is showing through a lot. Very translucent, I guess, would be the right way to word that. So you can see now I'm getting that texture in there, those little lines. This is why there was really no reason for me to waste the time trying to do that in the first place with the first layer with that yellow color. And it's still pretty flat, even though, yeah, I've got other colors, I've got a couple of other values, but most of the values are still pretty mid-range. I really need to start getting some darker colors in there. Now these colors will start, or markers will start to pick up the color underneath onto the nib, so, or the tip of the marker. So that's one of the things that I'll use my Winsor & Newton pigment marker paper for, to clean off I don't want to use a paper towel or something like that. That would be too absorbent. So I just scribble a little bit on that paper to clean off the marker in between colors if it does start to pick up one of the previous colors that I was blending it with. They have a colorless blender and then they have a white blender. The white marker isn't really an opaque white. It doesn't show up well. It'll slightly lighten the colors, but it can be used to blend things out or kind of mush things together, I think would be almost more accurate way of saying it, because you still, when you blend with that, you can still have a lot of the marker strokes. I prefer like soft blending. I'm going to use my fingers for, but that does let you blend two colors. So like here, if I had a lot of really harsh green and I wanted to blend softly into the lighter yellow color, I can add one of those blenders on top of it and it can blend like right there. You can see how it's basically making everything wet and blending together. Or I can just reactivate it with this and then use my fingers if it's a bigger section to smudge that area out. But little sections like this, I don't need to use my fingers. That is a colorless blender, and you can see how it's mixing those together. It makes it'll almost start to run if you do too much. Some of those markers are really wet, and you get this soft, almost watercolor-like feel. So I'm starting to get that sort of jeweled, shimmery look here. Taking a sepia color and starting to get the darker bits in there. If your darks aren't dark enough, your lights will not look light enough, even if they really are. I would say more often than not, that's the problem that most students I saw would have, is when they're color, they would look at it and think that they couldn't get the brights light enough. They won't go lighter than whatever they've got it. And it's like the lights are fine. The lights in many cases were too light. It's that your darks aren't dark enough, and that's making it appear that your brights aren't bright enough. If you want your brights brighter, put a dark color right next to it. So now I'm using the thicker edge of that marker, making some much bolder strokes there. Now, on something like this, I end up taking a lot of artistic liberties on different things, like like the line here, actually, that would be a good example there. How dark I'm making different areas. I use the reference photo just as a guide, but I'm not trying to copy that exactly. There's certain things I'm looking for, which direction that the feathers go in, that sort of thing. But with working in this medium especially, I found I just use it to give me an idea of where the feathers go, of what direction they go in, of what colors I want to use. But I take a lot of liberties. If you go find a Peacock reference photo, you'll see, I mean, it's a very stylized look. And I find that to be a much more fun way to work than trying to make it look super realistic. I did, on a couple of pieces, work really hard to make it as realistic as possible. And while I like the results, it's not I did a frog like that. I just have more fun when I use the looser style. And obviously you can use it either way, but doing something like this that's more stylized, I find to be a lot more fun with this medium. I find when I want something to be super realistic, pretty much any other medium I use is more suited to it. It's easier to make that happen. Onto his head. I'm starting with this light color, very, very light kind of aqua color. And I'm going to put a lot of detail on top, so it's not a big deal which direction my brushstroke is going here. You're really not going to see any of this in the end. And this is another area. I've not done a bird before with these markers, so I really didn't know what was going to be the best way to get the look of feathers. I wasn't sure how much detail I really needed to add. Now, this marker is one that is very wet. It kind of runs or bleeds from one color to another. And I don't know if all the markers like this color would be that way, or if sometimes one just gets a little bit of extra juice. I'm not sure what the determining factor is there. But I found this one and then the blue that I'm going to use, they really bled together. Gave a really pretty look. Now, if you want them to bleed together, and any colors that aren't, that's where that colorless blender, add that on top, and it will, that's that extra juice I'm talking about, where it makes it more wet, and it will let those colors really bleed if you really add a lot of that on there. I feel like I just haven't even touched the surface on different techniques that you would be able to use with these markers. Touch the surface, scratch the surface. I'm really bad at those sayings. You can really see there where the graphite still shows through. As long as I don't keep reworking that area again and again, I'll still see my lines. Using the black here. Definitely work light to dark with these markers. That is a big, big tip. If you work, like if I were to put the black here first and then try to put the blue around it, it's going to mix too much into it. My light blue areas wouldn't be light enough. So there's the highlight there. Watch the eyes. I remember looking back and seeing eyes that there was an art, I can't remember his name now. I had a book of his, I probably still have it somewhere, but I remember looking at his eyes that he would draw on wolves especially, and they looked so realistic. Eyes are actually really, it's one of the faster things to do, and it's very easy. Just look at that reference photo, watch where your lights are and where your darks are. One of the problems that I had is I had an idea in my head. This is what an eye looks like. I would have all of these lines going through the iris that I didn't even have in the reference photo. Like wasn't looking at anything. I was just making things up. And it never looked realistic. Look at that reference photo. Where are your lights? Where are your darks? And pay attention to the highlight on the eye. A lot of highlights, not in this case, but in a lot of highlights, you're going to have it fade from a light blue along the edges and then the brightest white highlight, kind of a dot in the middle of that. But you'll have this curve too. Their highlight, you will quite often want a curve around the eye, which gives you more of a glassy look, and it makes the eye look more three-dimensional. Right now he looks like he just has a hole in his head. We'll get there. But really look at the photos of the eye. Don't do what I used to do when I first started out and just make it up as you go along. Even when I had reference photos, I wasn't looking close enough at them. And I would try to force detail that wasn't necessarily there. So let's say you're drawing something, you're doing a pet portrait, and part of the eye is in the shadow, and you can't see the pupil and the iris and all the different colors. You just see a black shadow that kind of fades into the fur. That may be the best way to handle that. Let it be a black shadow that doesn't have a ton of detail and just fades into the fur. Don't always feel like you have to force a ton of detail into the eye if it doesn't require it. So in the case, let's say you're doing a portrait that has a lot of shadow on one side of the face. So the one shadowed side isn't going to have a lot of detail, but the other side may. Go ahead and focus on that one. You don't have to always balance it out. Also, another tip, when you are doing pet portraits especially, I see this a lot, because with pet portraits, you're usually going to have a photo where somebody took themselves and sent it to you to paint and they didn't do a good job on the photo. So a lot of people like to try to force the highlight on the eye to be the exact same. So let's say you've got a highlight on the one eye that you can see that's on the inner corner, and then the other side of the face is shadowed. So you put a highlight there anyway on the inner corner. Now the dog looks cross-eyed. Watch for that. Don't just put highlights because you think you need highlights. Pay attention to where highlights should go, where shadows should go. Really trust that in the reference photo. And yeah, you're going to get to a point where sometimes you'll have like the flash just completely whites out the eye and you have to make it up on your own. I would still find a different reference photo than to give you an idea of what the eyes should look like. I would just Google, let's say you're drawing a lab, Google a lab and look at those eyes as an example for what the eyes in your painting should look like. But don't make up highlights because, I mean, okay, when I say don't make up highlights, I mean don't make up the location of the highlights. There's a reason that the shine will be in a certain area on the eye, but you can adjust it a little bit, like curving, like I was talking about before. If you look at some of my other portraits, how the highlight will curve around the eye to make it look more rounded and to make it look more three-dimensional. It's not always going to be just a dot of white. Sometimes it will be, but really watch for that. Watch for when you can use that curve because it'll make the eye look so amazing and it's so easy to do. It sounds like we need a tutorial on that. But if you look at any of my portraits, I mean, you'll see where I've done that. The recent tiger video that I put up in acrylics with the damask background, that is a good example of that. And then a good example of an eye that's in shadow and doesn't really have a lot of detail, a lot of highlight, would be there's a horse in oil paint that has kind of a green background. That one, you can just go to my gallery on my website, lacree.com/gallery. And you can find those paintings there. But that would be an example of an eye that is in shadow and doesn't have a ton of detail. So here I started with black on the edge and now I've come through with brown and then of course I've got gray where that highlight is. Some of these markers that are very wet, you'll have brush strokes or marker strokes and they'll get rid of them all on their own. They just kind of flood out to this very soft area. Like you can see under the bird's head right there, that light blue and then the dark blue, you can really see there how it blended out. It smudged out. So that's what I was talking about with that watercolor type feel on some of these. But by adding the clear blender, you could create that look on any of the colors. Or heck, you could just add a little bit of water and let that smear out. That was really not bright enough, so I'm going to switch to a brighter orange. You see I'm working. I'm not touching the blue just yet. I'll wait till the end for that because I know that that's going to pick up on this orange marker and I'll have to keep cleaning it. And that's something that you really don't see here where I keep wiping the tip of the marker off on the Winsor & Newton marker paper, or pigment marker paper. So we've got a reddish orange now. Pull some of that in there. And these are great when you need tiny, tiny detail. Dots. Dots work so good for some of the little details. Really, really well with these markers. There are those dots for some of the details in there. For storage, if you were using these markers, I don't like the packages that they come in. They're these plastic things, and then the box that I had for the set, that was really hard to get them out of. I put mine in the same 3-drawer pastel boxes. I've got the same ones that I use for colored pencils. I bought those for these as well. I just had to take out the foam padding, and they fit really nicely. So that was an easy way to store them, and it makes it really easy for me to find the colors that I want. You want to store these flat. Do not put them one side or the other because the ink will all run, or pigment, whatever it is, will all run to one end. So definitely keep these flat in store while you're storing them. And that's one of the things that's kind of funny about the packaging that it comes in. It looks like it's set up that you would stack them or set them up, and you just don't want to do that with these. So I'm blending this purple in between the blue and the black, and it gives me a really nice transition between the two. You can really start to see now how the head is just being lost in with those back feathers. It just doesn't stand out at all. So this is actually the colorless blender, but it's picked up a bunch of black from something else I was blending. So I'm using it as a gray. I think that these will be a really good medium for those who want the bright color like you would get with a painting but aren't really comfortable with paint brushes. You can do a whole lot with these markers. And you can, I mean, like I said, I prefer other mediums for more realistic work, but I still think that these can do it. I've done it on the frog. There are certain things, and I think with more practice too, you would be able to get really realistic with these. Like everything, it's going to take practice and experience. But these, for somebody, let's say you've typically worked with colored pencil and you want that look of paint, but you don't, and something that's faster, but you're not comfortable with the brushes, try these out. Get a small set of these and see if it's something that you like. There are a lot of dots still. Even with the big end of the brush, a lot of what I'll do are just dots. Mixing some purple in with that gray there. And I've used paintbrushes to blend things out. My favorite are actually makeup brushes by e.l.f. I picked them up at, where was I? Old Navy, I think. They have a bunch of them by the register. I saw those, looks like, hey, these might be a nice texture, and they were. They worked really well for this. Of all the brushes I've tried, that is definitely my favorite. They blend okay. Your fingers, I think, work better for most things, but there are certain things which you'll see at the end where the brush works really well. And I like the colorless blenders too, both the white and the clear, for just pulling color out, smudging color that's already there into another area. And see how that beak too, everything's just being lost right there. Yeah, I'm gonna take I took some water on a Q-tip and pulled some of that out so that, to try to make the beak stand out more. Didn't really help. And see how that purple had been sitting there for a while, and when I went on top of it with this aqua color, it just blended right in. So this is what I mean by it'll always reactivate. You can always go back and blend more. That sometimes is a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So at this point, I'm really experimenting. I wasn't sure how I wanted to do the feathers on the neck. Now, like I said, if you don't like something, you just wipe it off. It's not a big deal. I remember taking classes, I was probably in elementary school or junior high, and the art teacher telling you, it must have been elementary, telling you they didn't want you to use an eraser at all. You had to draw everything and leave it exactly as it was. That was the most stressful thing to me and not fun at all. I did not enjoy that exercise. I like being able to erase things. I like being able to correct things. I always have. So this medium, I think that's one of the reasons that I like it so much. So the lines that I'm putting in here, you can see on the finished painting, I'm going to take most of these out. I did not like how they were coming out. So I tried to do them the same as I did on the tail. It just didn't look very good at all. Like I said, there was no stress. I didn't have to worry about make sure it's going to be the exact right technique. If I don't like it, wipe it off, blend it out. There's so many options. So many ways to correct things. And I think that's really my thing with the Copics. I feel like I can't erase, I can't fix. That's why I never really got into those. Whereas this, it gives me that ability. I like to experiment in my art. I like to try different things. I like to know that I can fix things when those things don't go well. So I thought that I would leave these the detailing here in those feathers. Didn't like that either. So technically I'm wasting time, but not really because I'm experimenting. I'm learning, do I like how this looks? And I learned, no, I do not. I'm using a combination of green, aqua, blue, and purple for a lot of that. So I'm taking the white blender, pulling out highlights in there, and see how it turns it to where it's got that watercolor kind of feel where it starts to bleed from one color into another with this, because it is a very wet marker. Some of my whites aren't as wet though, so there is it may just be some markers have more juice than others. Maybe some are starting to dry out or were already dried out, starting to dry out when I got them. Because initially when I was just commenting, I thought it might be the color, but then now I remember, no, some of the whites are different. I think it's just a difference of how much is left in there. Using the white, see how it lightens it. It's not like putting white, like a white colored pencil or a white anything. It doesn't show up that much, but it does lighten it a bit. Using that purple, and the purple there for some of these shadows works really well. The purple and the green, they'll blend together to kind of give you a soft, almost brownish tone, just because they're complementary colors. So if you were to do the same thing with like red and green, you'll get a brownish tone. Blue and orange, you'll get a brownish tone. Yellow and purple give you that brownish tone. So see how I just keep messing with this? I knew I didn't like it. Just keep messing with it till you do. And almost every single thing ever that I paint or draw, I will hit a stage where I hate it. I absolutely do not like it. I don't know how to fix it. I'm just like, ugh, this is terrible. Just keep working on it until you do like it. Now that looks pretty cool there. I actually like that look. I was using the white to lighten some of that up. But still not really what I want. Now, my main complaint at this point was that head and neck, it just blended in so much. That is not the look that I was going for. So here again with the white, I'm going to pull some of that out. And I have to keep dabbing this marker. The more brush strokes that I make, you can see it just starts to blend instead of giving you a light mark. I have to keep cleaning it off on my marker paper. But the problem is at this point, this is so wet that it's just all blending together. If I let it dry a little bit and then do one stroke, I can get it to be a lot lighter than it is when everything's all wet because I kept blending over it. But look at that. I mean, that's an interesting texture. I thought, well, maybe I'll try lightening up the background. Again, just mess with it until you like it. And in this medium, that is very easy to do. And you may try something thinking, let's see what happens when I do this. And you realize not only do you not like it, you made it way worse than it was before. Do not freak out. Don't feel like you ruined anything. Have a panic attack. Oh my gosh, everything's terrible. No, just do it again. Wipe that area off and do it again. You just learned a lesson. And learning those lessons is more valuable than just doing it right in the first place sometimes. Learning how to fix mistakes, learning what not to do, what you don't like. Those are really, really important and valuable lessons in art that I feel like too many people try to skip over. If you're too worried about doing everything correct, doing everything perfect the first time through, you are skipping some really important lessons that will help you to be a better artist in the end. So now this Q-tip has water on it. And look how I can get these highlights. And I'm lifting marker off the paper, and what I'll do is take that same Q-tip. Originally, when I would try doing this, I would just get a new Q-tip every time I needed it to, like, it started to get really dirty. And I realized I was blowing through Q-tips so fast. Super wasteful. So then I realized that you can actually just keep rinsing them. I just pinch the tip of the Q-tip in the water well that's next to me and rinse it off and keep reusing that same Q-tip again and again. So you can get them to last a lot longer. You don't have to just use a new one each time you need a clean Q-tip. And Q-tips, actually, if in the US anyway, that's a name brand that I'm just used to calling them. Cotton swab, I think, is what they're called, like the technical thing for that. So I'm doing the same thing on the neck. Now this started giving me a look that I really liked. And I get excited when doing this because at this point I start realizing, oh my gosh, this has so much more, much potential, this technique, for other subjects that I want to do. I really like the look that I started getting here. Like, you could do an entire impressionistic scene using these techniques. You could do, like, I mean, think of Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night. You could do that really easily with these markers and using the cotton ball or the swab, whatever, the Q-tip. We'll just go back to calling it a Q-tip. Using the Q-tip to lift some of that. Or even in creating something more realistic. Let's say you were drawing a landscape and you wanted trees. By the way that you move that cotton or the Q-tip, you're going to get some really neat technique or textures. Now here, everything's basically done, and I'm looking at this going, he's just blending in too much. I don't like how the background is right now. It's like his head is just lost in that mess. So I kept trying to hype up contrast in between the head and what's in the background. And I just wasn't getting what I liked. And what ended up happening, I kept messing with it, kept messing with it. I left it alone. I was like, okay, I'm done. Came back with a marker, used that heavy line. That did help, and you'll see that in a second. I did like what that black marker did a lot, but it still wasn't exactly, like, it just was still blending too much. So I left it alone. I stepped away from the piece for a while, and I thought I was done. I was like, yeah, this is good as it's going to get. I learned what I needed to learn from this. We'll move on. And then it clicked. I'm like, hey, what if I blurred this out? So I just went back to it and just, you'll see where I'll lift and smudge out that background, and it made it look so, or I like it so much better anyway. I'm sure somebody will tell me they liked it better how it is, but I liked it a lot better when I made that change. So why is the head blending in so much with the background? My values are all the same. My detail is all the same. Throughout the entire thing, I've got about the same amount of detail in the tail as I do in the head. And to top that off, all of my values, I'm all pretty mid-range. I mean, I've got some dark areas, but I've got some dark areas in everything. Everything has light and dark. Everything is about the same, and all balances too much. And that is why this head is just not standing out. So ways that you can make things stand out: blur out the background. That will always push your subject forward a lot. Even if the values are the same, blurring that out will make a big difference. Another thing can be the amount of detail that you put. Just don't put so much detail in one area as you do another. And then, of course, the other would be your contrast. Let's say my background, I just blacked. That would be another option that actually would have worked real well for this. I could have just taken the feathers and faded them into a dark shadow behind his head there, to where then they came to the light on the other side. I mean, there were quite a few options I could have done to push his head forward. You can always watch that in your work, that your subject is not being lost in everything else. Just mess with it until you like it. There's that black line right away. That, while yes, it gives it a cartoony look, it's a very stylized look. I didn't care. I liked it so much better. Now I personally do like the look of that kind of pop art feel where you have that heavy line on certain areas. It's not necessarily an outline of everything. It just certain areas have this bold line. You'll see me do that occasionally on different pieces. I just like how that looks. And again, I'm not trying to go with something super realistic here, so I'm combining those two styles, which really made a big difference. So that alone helped. So I thought, okay, once that was done, I'm pretty much done. That's it. I went through and did some more on the tail, but then as I walked away, I kept thinking, it's just not right. I'm just not in love with it yet. But look what a difference just that alone made. I think sometimes in our artwork, we get in our head that this is what I want it to look like, and I'm not going to be happy until it looks that way. Well, I found in this case, because of the values that I chose, it didn't work. So I had to alter that. If I want to make this piece of art still work, I always look at it as, would I want to hang this on my wall, or would my youngest sister hang it on hers? If the answer is no, keep messing with it till one of those two, somebody would hang this on their wall. I don't want it just to sit in a portfolio forever. It's not that much that I need to change, just keep messing with it until at the bare minimum, I may not sell it. Well, I'm actually not planning on selling this one, but somebody should want to hang it on their wall. If they don't, if either me or my sister won't, then that lets me know, keep messing with it till I can make someone like it. I only need one person to want it on their wall. So that's why I just kept coming back. Like, it's just not right yet. I'm not happy with it just yet. Right now it almost has that stained glass feel where there's really just there's not a lot of contrast. Everything's just, I mean, you can see the subject, but it's not there yet. Okay, well, let's lighten this up. Now I've got a weird line along the edge where it fades out, and that doesn't look right. See, I can blend and get that nice soft look with smudging that with my finger there once I reactivate it with the colorless blender. Threw the detail back in there. That actually made me lose my black line. Like, now the black line is just being lost in the black that I pulled in there. That did not work. So I stepped away and decided, let's take a paintbrush and some water. This is where I came back later on. It's like, let's see what happens. So I'm adding a bit of water and lifting some with a paper towel. And I realized, not really liking that. I mean, it is lightening it up, and that is a goal here. I do need to lighten that some. This is that e.l.f. brush. It's a makeup brush that I got at Old Navy. Target may have those as well. Okay, apparently I'm missing a clip there, but I kept doing that. I kept going back through with the brush like you're seeing me do here, and then lifting some with the paper towel, and just continuously went back and forth like this. I didn't blend out the spots too much, but I mean, I did leave, you can see I left a lot of that in the finish, but I blended around it a lot, and now the head is really starting to stand out more. I have to keep rinsing this brush because it lifts so much pigment that I'm just spreading it around, and some of this I actually want to lift pigment off the paper. So there, I've added more water to that brush. See, that really softens stuff out. So this alone, I mean, I've done similar stuff, but not to this extent with these markers. This alone made this project worth it for me to have seen what happened when I took a brush and just smudged out an entire background like this. That was a really good lesson. I'm really excited to have tried this and learned that I can use this in future pieces. So sometimes you may do a painting that you're not super in love with. Even if you're not, don't be discouraged by that. What did you learn something from it that you can apply to something else? There was a painting I did years ago, and I've told you guys this before, but it was a scene inside a scene, and that's something that I do a lot. This one, it almost looked like the outside scene, like it felt like you were in a cave, which is not really what I wanted. There was the earth and a tree, and then it went around the edges. And the way that I did the background, you kind of felt like you were in a cave looking out into a forest. I liked portions of it. I didn't love the painting. It wasn't my favorite by any means, but that painting led to several paintings that I did love, that I do still love, and that I do regularly sell prints of. So when you have a painting that you're not super thrilled about, don't ever let that discourage you. Take what you can learn from it and apply it to something else. And ideally, do like what I did here and make it to where it's at least good enough that me or my younger sister will hang this on would be happy with this on our wall. As long as somebody likes it. But if it's something that you're like, no, this is terrible, even I wouldn't hang this on my wall. My sister, no one wants this on their wall. That kind of to me is a good sign that I need to keep working on it. At least get it to that point. All this talk, I'm pretty sure I am going to send this to my sister. No one tell her. It'll be a surprise. Now, if I wanted to blend that out even more, while it's still wet, I can take my finger over that and smudge it. Your finger is one of the best blending tools when it comes to these markers, and I really didn't use them much at all on this piece, which is kind of a first for me. But you can get really, really nice blending. If I wanted nice soft clouds, maybe I'll do that on one of my next ones with this medium. You want nice soft clouds, use your fingers, work them in kind of circles, and you can smudge that around and get just beautiful, really soft results that almost look like an oil painting. And they're non-toxic, so it's okay if they get on your hands. And look at how much more, I mean, if you take this video back a few minutes, look at the difference when I blurred out that background. That is a huge difference in how that head now stands out. It wasn't that the background I didn't like, it's that it didn't work with the head, with the focal point on here is what the problem was. It wasn't that the background, oh, I just need to keep adding more detail. That's what wasn't working. You have to, when something that you don't like in your work, it's very important that you pinpoint what it is that isn't working. What is it that you don't like? In this case, I knew that head was being lost in the background. So it wasn't that I needed to just add more detail to the background. What techniques will make that come into focus? So in this case, you can blur it out, you can adjust the value. So I could have made it way darker so that the head was bright enough to stand forward. That would have been an option. You need to figure out what it is that you don't like about something and then figure out how to fix it. As artists, we are problem solvers. And I think too often, especially when we're starting, we want someone else to solve those problems. No. Figure it out yourself. I mean, yeah, there's tutorials. There are going to be answers to certain very specific things like, let's say, I can't get my acrylic paint to blend, it's drying too fast. There are going to be answers that people can help you with that. But for the most part, when you're painting, learn to problem solve. That is the biggest thing. It is so important as an artist, and I think that we tend to forget that. We're not just being creative. There's a technical side to things, and we need to problem solve. We're constantly doing that. No matter what it is we're working on, something's going to go wrong, or we're not going to like something, and we have to figure out how to make us like it. Even if the piece is going great along the way, you're constantly solving problems. That's what art really, I think, boils down to, is how do I make this happen? How do I make this look how I want it to? And when you can start asking yourself those questions, it's really going to make a difference in your work.